We know pay is important. I know people who are in wellness and other places will tell you theirs is the most important thing. Jokingly, I'll tell people if you take 10% of the wellness budget away, people might be upset. If you remove 0.5% of their pay, your room will be full in HR with people coming in complaining about their pay. It's vitally important, and it moves the needle on how they act and how the business can then, strategically attract and retain the right people. Payroll, until the past couple of years, was just basically who sent me my check and where we got information.
Here's a pre-show scenario for you. Imagine you had to visit 6 houses just to cook your dinner. One place has the pots and pans, one has the stove, another has the food. You get the idea. Sounds ridiculous, right? Well, the reality is most global businesses operate the same way, using 6 different tools just to pay their global workforce. But now there's one platform offering truly simple, truly global payroll. And that's today's sponsor. That's Deel. That's Deel. With in-house customer success managers, local payroll experts, dedicated points of contact, and more, Deel eliminates third-party handovers and provides unmatched compliance and flexibility. In fact, they'll even help you track and flag the latest changes in payroll regulations before they even become an issue. So are you ready to transform your global payroll system? If you are, click the link in the show notes below to book a demo with Deel today. That's Deel. My name is Nick Day. I'm CEO at JGA Recruitment Group. We are global specialist payroll recruiters. And today we're going to be talking about how we can integrate Pay Philosophy with payroll. It's going to be a strategic discussion. It's going to be a really insightful conversation. So do stay tuned. Before we jump into that, please do remember to subscribe to the show. Please do share it with all of your payroll colleagues and friends. And hopefully we can raise the profile of payroll globally. But really, if you can, I'll be hugely thankful if you can leave us a review. That really helps us in the Apple ratings and the podcast ratings and standings. So if you get an opportunity to click 5 stars at the end, assuming you've enjoyed it, please do so. I'll be very, very grateful. Now, today I have the pleasure of speaking to Sean Luitjens. He's a seasoned professional from Visier, and today we're going to be discussing how Pay Philosophy, pay equity, and payroll are becoming increasingly interlinked. If you haven't seen that interlink coming to your payroll function yet, trust me, you will. And we're going to delve into exactly why these elements should be seen as part of a unified business strategy. Sean is here with me today to share his deep expertise in how he's integrated compensation strategies with payroll systems. He's been working with SaaS for many, many years. He has a rich background in strategic compensation and analytics. And we all know analytics at the moment is kind of the new currency within payroll. The importance of analytics and how we utilize that can really help bring payroll to the fore, get us noticed by those boardrooms as we bring it to help lead organizational change. Sean brings a unique perspective on how we can leverage this payroll data. So without further ado, Sean, welcome to the Payroll Podcast. Great to have you on the show, and also a fellow triathlete. So I'm hugely excited. There aren't many of us in the world of payroll as far as I'm aware. So huge pleasure to welcome you to the show today. How are you feeling?
I'm good, although I do appreciate you use the word seasoned as opposed to old or venerable or wily veteran.
I think it was a deliberate choice word, Sean, after realizing just how fit and healthy you are with all of your very impressive triathlon results and escapades. I think old would be wholly unfair. Seasoned, I think, is good. Well, listen, let's use that expertise. Let's use your seasoned wisdom to ask the first question. What does the word payroll mean to you?
Yeah, so it's interesting. You and I, one of the reasons we touched base is for me, coming from Comp and Ben for since the last millennium, we'll call it that way. So we'll limit my experience. Payroll, until the past couple of years, was just basically who sent me my check and where we got information. And kind of the genesis of the discussion was like, who are the payroll people? And now we're having to work with the payroll side of the house, and both comp. As you find out, they're not that different from the standpoint of both comp and payroll have tried to get a seat at the table to be more strategic to the company, to do these things, but they've stayed like 1 degree of separation from each other in the past. Basically, payroll took care of paying people. So literally my expertise on payroll until a couple of years ago was I got paid. That was the knowledge I had. And I contacted somebody in payroll if something was wrong. And from a software standpoint, it's where we might pick up some data for analytics, but they weren't nearly as integrated as we had hoped around kind of, tying two good sources of data together, or two pieces to help the business.
I think you're absolutely right about the shared challenge of trying to get, noticed at board level. Compensation reward specialists here often feel like they're a little bit undervalued in the work that they do. And of course, we know the importance of that work. But more than ever now, we're seeing pay philosophy link with remuneration strategy. We're seeing payroll and reward roles start to become hybrid in their nature, with payroll and reward managers, heads of payroll and reward, or heads of payroll and compensation, and so on and so forth. So I wonder if you can give us a bit of an explanation as to why it's becoming so crucial for organizations to view compensation and payroll as intertwined business processes.
Yeah, I think, if you think about it, I'm baffled it's taken this long. A half to 2/3 of your spend is in humans. So i.e. payroll. And so in the past, I think compensation has dealt with some actuals as it goes, but kind of the future. And then you've got payroll, which is the actuals and what actually happens. And there's a lot of metrics there. So I think is the ability to process information, create analytics over what's happened over time. Then we're not just looking at one snapshot during a compensation cycle. We need like the whole payroll history of what happens with somebody, so that we can start to look at and say, well, what has happened with this person over time? How has their pay been affected? How does pay change people? Because we know pay is important. I know people who are in wellness and other places, speaking of triathlon, will tell you theirs is the most important thing. But, jokingly, I'll tell people, if you take 10% of the wellness budget away, people might be upset. If you remove 0.5% of their pay, your room will be full in HR with people coming in complaining about their pay. It's vitally important, and it moves the needle on how they act and how the business can then, strategically attract and retain.
So we're going to talk about data for sure. I want to just hold that thought for a moment. I know the people listening to this will want to know about how we can utilize analytics more effectively as well. But where do you think that sea change came from? What was the thing that suddenly, from your perspective, enabled or helped C-suites to suddenly sort of wake up and go, hey, why have we undervalued these vital functions for so long? It seems so obvious. The stats you've just given there, just 0.5%, the room's full of people. You're absolutely right. 10%. It's the same, but that's been there since the dawn of time. And yet suddenly now there's almost like a realization that payroll is important and we need to invest in payroll and we need to start looking at analytics. And this is why haven't we done this before? Because now everyone's starting to realize the potential and the power of what good payroll and compensation strategy can do for an organization. But what was it that caused the sea change?
So I would back it up to the ability to analyze the analytics or create the analytics, whatever you want to call it. So if you take data from multiple sources, so you take a large company, right? It's just a lot of data. Think about the payroll data, right? You start adding in base pay, short-term incentives, long-term incentives, and then as payroll people can do all the deductions, allow all the stuff that happens through that processing. And now you have that data across multiple divisions, business units, countries, currencies, whatever it is. How do you bring that data in and normalize it? And if you think about that in the past, it would have been through Excel, right? Or you would have had to build a database, and it's ridiculously hard. And I think by the time you then say, don't just give me a snapshot, give me the last 10 years worth of data and analyze those and tell me now what human behaviors come out of that. I've been in tech 20 years and I would have said, 25 years, like that's a huge project. And payroll and comp, both also, there's a lot of things they share. You come to learn. Neither of them tend to get tons of money, right? Nobody wakes up at the C-suite and says, you know what, we've got some extra budget. Let's give it to payroll or the comp team. That statement has probably never been said. And so they were making do with what they had. And so the processing power of information, so systems and platforms that can pull in data from, 25 payroll systems, because not every company has all one payroll, right? It's not as, payroll is a lot like comp. It's a lot like global mobility in HR. It looks simple, right? When you're from the outside, you're like, how hard can it be, right? We just got to pay some people, pull some taxes out. Can't be that hard. And then, for me recently, digging in, you're like, holy cow, like this is highly complex. And of course, mistakes are magnified because of tax and just a million other reasons. So I think the processing power, the ability to have a platform, the way to be able to do it, and the ability to have tools, which I know you've talked about, to process payroll and do that faster means now I have time to start to be strategic and the tools to basically analyze the data to make strategic hypothesis about what I'm going to do. And then the analytics, and we don't have to talk too much about analytics, but the analytics to then say, was my thesis right? How do I adjust my thesis based on where I want the business to go? And that includes, kind of secondary and tertiary sources of data. So in the past, payroll was just how much does Nick make? How much did he make? That data. But can I actually tie that to the metrics that he has at work? Can I pull that in? Each division, revenue, expense, just all that information can come in, and you can analyze all the payroll data along with the business outcomes now, just due to sheer processing power and the platforms that are out there that can normalize that data so that people can be
you make a number of good points. I think the one interesting one, though, is outside looking in, right? People outside of the world of mobility, compensation, remuneration, and payroll, they think it looks easy. And I don't want to talk about the big red button in the sky, right? But people think it looks easy. But that's a credit to the professionals that do the work, because if they made it look difficult, that's a suggestion to say we're not getting it right. And there's a problem. And that's when the complexity comes to the fore. And what payroll people do so well is they hide that complexity by delivering accurate, compliant payroll solutions. It's kind of you're never going to get out of that box, because the only way you can get out of it is by getting it wrong and showing how complex it is, which is, of course, is what any payroller wants to do. Yeah. We don't want to necessarily make the show all about analytics, but they say that data is the most valuable commodity in the world now. They say data's more valuable than gold and diamonds and these other things. What makes payroll data so valuable, though? And does the size of an organization influence its utility?
So two things there. I think payroll data is kept over a long period of time, and you can see the ramifications of making choices, right? So as a company, do I give base pay increases? Do I change the leverage on certain positions, right? So you have target earnings versus actual earnings, and then do people stay or leave? So payroll basically is the source of truth. It has to be, because you get paid there, right? You can put the data other places and have other sources of truth, but at the end of the day, it's the actual amount of money that someone was paid over a period of time for doing a job. That data then it becomes kind of super valuable. To your point, I don't know if it's gold or diamonds or platinum or whatever it is, but that data is actuals over time. And I think that is what's really key to be able to look at it. Even if you started a year ago and I decided that we were going to give less base pay increase and more bonus or higher leverage in the bonus, what happens when we actually do those payouts and make those changes? Do people stay or leave versus what they did in the past? Was that what I was expecting? And so it's the actual data that becomes really interesting. And obviously payroll has only people who are getting paid, right? So you don't have data. When people leave, they get their last paycheck and then they drop out of the system. So there's really cool metrics and predictive analytics to help businesses be strategic. And so that's where, when you and I were first kind of chatting, this payroll piece of getting people paid correctly, and then you have a pay philosophy, which is really, what am I going to do next, and how does that tie to the business? It creates a really cool circuit, as opposed to just two processes. You can now have a thesis, see if that thesis works, run that back through. And that's why I think payroll professionals are learning much more about comp, and comp professionals are learning much more about how payroll works. Because payroll has the actual what comes out of your pocket piece too. Not to ramble on a little bit, but if you give certain changes, certain places, you can actually see what happens in the behaviors of those people based on what you're offering.
Yeah, well, I think that's, you made a point earlier when we talked about the sea change piece. You said it probably came in when, technology evolved and we had access to more data, and we could integrate these systems together to pull better reports and do more with our data. When we think about data being valuable or more valuable than gold and diamonds, I think if we use it wisely, it can have a massive impact on why we're losing employees. We can look at why we've got such attrition, our starters and leavers, where we've got absences, where we've got pay gaps and things like that. And actually those metrics allow you to make changes at a board level that say, well, if we make these changes, we're going to retain more employees, we're going to attract better employees, or whatever it might be. And actually that's where the value comes in. You don't have to then spend all your money on attraction, retention, and reinventing the wheel. So I think there's a real value in doing it that way. And I think because those systems you talk about have put that into the limelight, it's helped payroll come into the limelight at the same time, because payroll holds so much data, arguably more data than probably any other function in a business, because it deals with the most businesses' central piece, which is the payroll, the human element of it. So I think it's really interesting. You mentioned pay philosophy in there, and I want to delve into that a little bit, because You've obviously done an awful lot of work in pay philosophy, and by all means, share some of your expertise and your background that's brought you into this space. And I know payrolls, as you say, the last couple of years, but you've been in pay philosophy and comp for a lot longer. How can companies effectively tie pay philosophy and payroll together? Because I think it's a really important conversation to have, because it's another way, another method for payroll people to raise their profile strategically within an organization. But to do that, they need to take certain steps. So what steps do they need to take to help tie these two things together?
So the soapbox I've been on actually inside the comp space has been, why do you only do 1 or 2 merit cycles a year and make changes through the year? And this might show my naivety in payroll, but I do remember years ago that, one of the reasons was simply payroll processing, right? You had to send out paper. You had to somehow aggregate what someone's increase was. You had to then fax that. So not everyone will even know what a fax machine is, maybe. Fax that to the payroll company. The payroll company would fax it back. You'd find errors. And so the process was really, really difficult. And so part of the merit process was getting data to set up my pay bands and my pay philosophy. That took time. That was really hard. And then the actual, how do I make changes in the pay system was, I'm sure you've got listeners, like tremendously difficult. And to your point, like payroll is interesting compared to other departments. You make a mistake, a mistake. Like that's it. And it's highlighted. In other places, like we have bugs in software. If we don't have enough bugs in software, we say we're not going fast enough. Like if you have mistakes in payroll, everybody lets you know about it. And so being able to then create a pay philosophy and incorporate it very fast was difficult. Now you could potentially do 4 cycles a year to deal with pay equity issues, new hires, have a pay philosophy that changes and gets tweaked all the time because the tech can tie the two together and you can implement a pay philosophy much faster and, more accurately. I wouldn't say more accurately, with ease, more accurately, because I think to your point, payroll in the past, it's remarkable. Like the amount of payroll professionals who will talk about having an error, over a year. And I'm like, I make a mistake every day and I'm considered reasonably okay. Like in payroll, that's just not acceptable. It's a tough, nobody notices. Nobody ever probably sends payroll a note, an employee. I know I'm guilty of this. I've never sent payroll a note and said, hey, thanks, 52 paychecks in a row. That's awesome.
Right.
Like
absolutely right. And anecdotally, you still hear the stories now around the dinner table when you're out with friends, whatever, about the one time in 5 years ago when my pay was wrong and this was the repercussion. But of course, if we get it wrong, it challenges people's securities, right? They've got mortgages, they've got bills, and all that. It sets off a domino effect of things that potentially happen, which is why there's so much importance put on in getting it right, because we're dealing with humans.
But you think about pay philosophy like merit and OKRs and, the recency effect for bonus, right? So, Sean may have been horrible for 9 months, but this last project I did okay. And the recency effect will show that maybe I'll get a better increase. If you do it quarterly, you can kind of continually do this. And so that link is there. And also, the analytics between payroll and what happens to them. Well, I went to quarterly and I gave them more opportunity. That's what, someone might say. I'm giving Nick more opportunity to make more money because I'm going to give him more of a, lower base pay, or I'm going to freeze base pay and give him more upside. And you realize after 2 or 3 periods, Nick left, or more of his peers left, or, they weren't making their numbers if you pull in the financial data along with the payroll data. And so analytically, you can start to see the ramifications of the business decisions you made, but you can only do that when you have
Where then do you think pay philosophy should sit? Because if there was an HR director, CHROs listening to this, they'd say, that should sit with them, potentially. You'll have CEOs, CFOs and whatever saying, well, actually, it should sit with us. We manage the budgets. I imagine the easy answer would say, well, actually, it's a group of people. We should bring them together. We get someone from comp, someone from mobility, and get it. But if you had to leave it with someone that had ultimate control, or even if there was a hierarchy of needs here in terms of who, where payroll should sit, where do you see them sitting in the pay philosophy strategic side of things?
A lot of it has to do, and this will sound like a political answer, a little bit politician answer. I think of the company size. So How much work has to get done. I think there is a lot in pay philosophy, depending on the types of roles and everything else. that is there. So, if you've got a lot of people on bonus, you got, depending on the global nature and how you pull all that together in a comprehensive piece, I think there's some comp kind of leading that. I think payroll needs to have a seat at that table to start talking about how that actually gets, accomplished, what data we have in. The whole thing with analytics is if the data is not good, like this is, you can back this up almost anywhere that you go, the predictability and the thesis that you're making, and then how you evaluate, was I successful? If the data is not good, you don't have, it all goes bad. And so I think having that payroll piece becomes critical. I think the other piece is, with them partnering with comp, which is probably what would be my answer. The rules and regulations around payroll now, comp is up with them, but not the same way as payroll. Obviously I sound it so people can tell I'm an American. Although my number one club is Arsenal.
I'm a Spurs fan, so
I'll that off whether that's good.
I'll scratch that from the show.
I did not know that, so we'll scratch that. We'll keep talking anyway. Although it's better with the table this year. Yeah. So
actually, there's an interesting point there because to bring a football or a soccer, if you're in the US side, analogy into play. This is actually where I'd see payroll in the scheme of things, right? You've got a manager for a football team, Premier League level. Let's call it Spurs, Arsenal, whoever. Maybe that manager is the CEO. For the manager, in order to create a game plan for the next level of opposition, they need a strategic plan. And you'll have someone that analyzes the data of the next opponent, the passes, the tackles, where the ball goes, all that kind of stuff. And I see that's where payroll sits. I think payroll is the function that can analyze the data that sits behind the pay philosophy, along with comp, and the comp might be the coach of a different area. You've got someone in global mobility. We'll look at, who should mark who. They all kind of come together as a group in order to create the strategy for the manager, the CEO in this instance, to have the game plan to go forward with the players, right? But I think from payroll's perspective, it's that data they've got access to that can really help them pull together what a good pay philosophy could look like. They can look at where bonuses are having an effect and where they're not, where we're seeing absences or people leaving a business. Even though from the CFO's eyes, they say, well, they want a really good remuneration against benchmark. They may be, but we're still losing them. So what else can we do to tie them in here? Our data tells us this. And I think that could be their role in the bigger part. It's a really important role. You can't come up with a game plan if you're the manager or you're the CFO or the CEO without that data. Or if you do, you're going in blind. And I think that's where payroll needs to go, you know what? I'll put my hand up here and say, I've got all this access to this data. And I think from what I've analyzed and what we're looking at, we're seeing these trends, and I think you may want to consider them. That's how I would see it.
So to me, it's kind of who owns the, whether it's an analytics platform or the analytics piece, right? And so company size starts to play. Do you have a people analytics function?
That's fair.
Because that then becomes kind of the, a little bit of the coach somewhere, right? With players coming in and payroll saying, these are the rules. There are rules, right? Like I know, again, back to being an American, there are recent changes around hourly wage, and salary exempt wage limitations. Payroll knows that they can't get those wrong when they get paid out. And they have access to a lot of the data and the ability to make sure that data is correct. So do they own the people analytics function? Does comp own the people analytics function? Is there a people analytics function?
Yeah, that point.
There are many companies that have a people analytics function. And then you start to pull all those people in. I think the crux of it then becomes, who's making the decision at the end of the day on pay philosophy. I think it's typically going to be head of total rewards or CHRO or head of HR. But it would behoove them to obviously pull all the right people in to talk about, is this the right data? This is the change. Can we make these changes? Right. So there are fundamental changes like, hey, you know what we'd like to do? I'd like to lower base pay, 20%, but give employees the option to make 30 or 40% more. Right. So that's the pay philosophy I think I want to do. Someone in the company has to understand all the payroll, rules and regulations and be like, that's a great idea, Sean, but you can't do that. We're going to fall under these lines. We can't do this. This isn't, it won't work. But can we do this? Because they know where we can start to work together and figure out the best way to come up with the next thesis for
which is good because you've just highlighted the importance of the human element of the compliance understanding, the contextualization of whether a process can or cannot work. It's not a computer says yes or no. Sometimes you need that human contextualization, understanding of the nuance of compliance to know if you can or cannot do something. And I think that's really important because payroll people are frightened about AI coming in and stealing jobs and things. But actually, I think they raised a really good example of why that expertise is so important. I wonder if you could share some best practices for organizations that are aiming to advance the way they integrate the systems, the way they integrate the functions. Obviously, this is something that you're heavily involved in the work that you do anyway, and you've worked with SaaS platforms for I think 2 decades, if I recall correctly. What are some of the best practice things you could share with our listeners about how we can integrate those more effectively? Hello, global payroll leaders. Are you facing challenges in finding the right payroll talent for your team? If you are, I hear you, and I'm here to offer you a solution. Because at JGA Payroll Recruitment, we're experts at sourcing, attracting, and engaging with top-tier global payroll talent that really drives business success. So don't let the frustration of finding great payroll professionals hold you back from raising the profile of payroll in your organization. The cost of a poor hire isn't just financial. It costs you time, or worse, it damages the reputation of your payroll operation. That's why we're 100% dedicated to ensuring your recruitment journey with us is nothing short of exceptional. Partner with us at JGA because we're an award-winning global payroll recruitment agency with a proven track record of success. We have over 100 5-star Google reviews, and we're trusted by many of the world's leading brands. And we would love to help you elevate your team with the best payroll talent available anywhere in the world. Reach out to us today at 01727 800 or 377 or visit us at jjrecruitment.com. And while you're at it, why not sign up to our weekly payroll newsletter for exclusive industry insights and job opportunities? With us, your perfect payroll opportunity or your perfect payroll hire awaits.
Yeah, so I think having that common platform. So, for us, there's an analytics platform. There are other solutions out there as well, myriad of solutions. But being able to pull that data in and normalize it, which, as I'm sure people in payroll can tell you, gets complicated very fast, right? So if you're in 5 or 6 different countries in Europe, and you have to pull data in and normalize that data, do you treat it as 5 or 6 different sets? Are you able to kind of cut and slice the data by country, by division? How do you compare divisions when they go across regions? So getting it into a normalized place, a system that can normalize the data. And in those 5 or 6 countries in that example, I don't know what the exact statistics are, but I would wager, if I was a betting man, they're not all the same payroll system. Every country will have a different payroll system or might have different providers across those. So how do you normalize that and pull the data in? Which again, payroll becomes really, really integral to that, to talk about what is like for like when you're matching data across it. What we call it in country A isn't what we call in country B. How do you deal with countries who have 13-month payroll? Like, there's decisions that have to be made to make sure that we're comparing apples to apples. Once that data is normalized, then I think from a pay philosophy standpoint, you can start to think about what actually drives the business. And where I've been using the term get greedy when I've been out with some of the compensation places, with what you're asking for technology. So things like segmenting out your compensation pay philosophy. I'm going to treat one group differently with how much I give them and how I bonus them, et cetera, than another group. That fundamentally used to be much harder to do, because how do you implement that? Everyone was in Excel. How do I pull 100 Excel sheets back in together and then kind of work with that? Technology handles the ability to kind of deal with being able to have a pay philosophy created across different groups and then actually have it go through the comp planning or merit process. Have that be right. Make sure there were equitable choices inside of there, and then pull it back into payroll, and then make sure that the payroll gets run correctly with the.
I mean, you highlight something that's quite interesting there, because I wrote an article recently for Payroll, Global Payroll magazine, published by Payo, and it was all about the link between payroll and DEI and removing bias, and how actually never before we've really seen the impact that payroll could have on effective diversity, equity, and inclusion policies and practices. And I wanted, you've talked a little bit there about how, well, the way I interpret it there, potentially we can remove bias from the process if we get this right by using platforms and other things. Tell us a little bit about the work that you do at Visier, because your website also says that it's a smart compensation solution. It combines, I love the language, it's the kind of language I would use, but it combines the art and science of pay philosophy to enable better business decision making and better pay conversation with employees. But part of that is about removing bias as well, isn't it? So I wonder if you can just bring to life what it is you do, what your business does, but also, most importantly, how that relates to payroll and why that might be valuable for the payroll professionals listening to the show.
So Visier, for those who don't know, it's kind of the global leader in people analytics. If you look at the 9 box or whatever, and this is where you see I'm not a true professional, Nick. The cool kids are in the top right, and that's where Visier is with everybody, which is really important when you talk about all the analytics across a company, because we built the compensation tool, which is where payroll feeds into a lot of times, as well as others, on top of those analytics. That's important because, as we kind of segue back to your question, if you want to do pay for performance and you want to do it equitably, for example, you need to create a merit matrix. And that matrix might say if you're paid high in the range and doing a good job, you might make less money than someone who's paid low in their range and doing a good job. What might be even weirder and setting up for conversations is you might be really high paid in the range and doing a good job. And someone who's paid low in the range but doing a moderate job might get the same or better increase than you. And so how do you do that and make it equitably? So equity is basically defined as same pay for the same job, right? Same performance, same job, as you talk about the EU transparency directive, et cetera. Are we paying equitably? And so you create a merit matrix that, in this case, that would talk about performance, which obviously is now reliant on that, and pay, and getting the pay right, because you're going to create pay ranges based on your comp philosophy and benchmarking to say where is Nick paid in his range, and then the ability to have a tool that can basically push that out to an entire organization down and make sure you still make budget, giving managers some latitude. So you're like, okay, Nick's been doing better, or he's a valuable part of our team, even though some of the metrics don't show that he's a valuable part of the team. I want to give him some more money. Sean does an okay job, but he annoys everybody. So I'm going to give him a little bit less money. There's some barriers there that you can put in, but you want to make sure that people are making equitable decisions. I use the term anchor points a lot. So I give managers an anchor point. Managers are not payroll or compensation professionals, right? I mean, that's the interesting thing. We ask them once, twice, if I get my way 4 times a year, to have a discussion about pay. And when they go through this process, they don't do it every day. Like, you're asking them to be good at something that they don't do every day. I mean, we're both triathletes. If I ask you to swim once a quarter, how great are you? How much fun is that going to be? And how good are you going to be at it? And your expectation for how good you are. So if we can give them some anchor points to say, here's the methodology and why Nick is paid this. This is where he is in the range. This is the performance you gave him. This is the makeup of his compensation. And that's done equitably. And then software that can go back and say, okay, now as a company, did we do that equitably, and where were the outliers? So that you can look at those outliers and say those outliers were based on performance or range. They were trying to do compression, or were they based on things that we don't want to talk about? Was it based on gender, race, religion, or something like that? And so we can go back and rectify that before it's in payroll, because once it goes to payroll, like undoing things in payroll is
I think it's fascinating. I'm going to ask you a question in a minute, which I'm intrigued to know the answer to, but just to give it a little bit of foundation. You said you came into the world of payroll, or payroll was more into your world about 2 years ago, right? But one of the things I want to do with this show is I want people that listen to it to understand where payroll is moving and where the opportunities exist for you going forward. Payroll want to be more strategic. Payroll people generally want to be more strategic. They want to be seen with a little bit more respect by C-suites and others, and say, actually, we do a really challenging job, and it's complex. But we know that to get that profile increase, you've got to collaborate. You've got to collaborate with comp, reward, whoever it might be, and you've got to be open to change and open to understanding how the world is shifting in the world of payroll. Now, I don't think we'd have even had this conversation 5 years ago. It tells me that payroll has moved an awful long way. The needle has shifted significantly, as it has in comp and pay philosophy. And you talked there about DEI. A conversation would never link with payroll 5 years ago. This is all new stuff. So I'd urge anyone listening to this now, if you're in the world of payroll, get up to speed with this stuff. I mean, there's a great resource library on your website. I'll put a link in the show notes where people can actually really get ahead of what some of the work that you guys are doing and how it's benefiting organizations, right? So I'll let people do that on their own terms. But even so, if you're not talking about pay philosophy and you're working in payroll at a senior level, there's an opportunity here for you to do so. If you're not yet working with comp strategy, there's an opportunity for you to do so. And the opportunities are there for you. You've got to go seek them out and go find them. And to lead this back into a question, what I'd love to know is, by your own admission, you came fully more immersed in the world of payroll 2 years ago. What was your view of payroll pre being immersed in it as you are now, and what's your view now? How has that shifted since you've been more involved in working with senior payroll professionals, more immersed in the work that is linking these things together? Has your view of the industry shifted?
Yeah, I think, like I mentioned, it's way more complicated because in the past, it was kind of like you give them information and then, it was a great source of information. The data, whether it's good or bad, is really important to us. And obviously the data is good in payroll because an employee will tell you if it's not right. Maybe not if it's too much, but they definitely will tell you if it's too little, right? That is there. I think much like comp, actually, when I got into comp and ben, and I come from the software and as a developer by trade, there's kind of two ways you can go. And I think you just hit on it. You can just do the job and be functionally great at your job and getting payroll processed and making sure the data is right, and then maybe export it somewhere. And people do the strategic things with it. Or you have the opportunity because you're sitting on top of a large swath of the data that is critical to doing some of the analytics. There's obviously the business data, et cetera, and figuring out what those drivers are, being part of the analytics and being kind of part of the strategic discussion because the technology's there. And to your point, understanding, enough to be dangerous in comp philosophy. How are people handling comp planning? How do people come up with ranges and grades and what's grading? So when you compare people in a market that's there, if you're in Europe, there's almost no chance you can't get educated on pay equity and transparency and what's required. All that data comes out of payroll. So as we talk to clients, that data comes out of 20, 25 payroll systems. We don't go a week without hearing the term payroll. Even when you talk about comp planning software, you talk about smart compensation, we get the data from somewhere, but eventually the discussion is how do we feed it back into payroll? And then how do we learn from payroll or other systems of truth? What were the ramifications of your decisions that you made during the comp planning process? So learning basically 1 or 2 degrees of separation outside of payroll. And comp has been just as bad in benefits at this. You see 2 types of people, the ones who basically stay in their lane and kind of, functionally do their job great. And there's nothing wrong with that. And those who are like, this is actually a bigger part of a picture. And based on technology and the ability to aggregate data, I can actually affect the business more by understanding my data and how it interacts with everything else because I've got the time.
I think what's interesting, I obviously see the world in a different lens completely. I run a payroll staffing agency, right? So we specialize in placing payroll people all over the world. So we know, although when you make a move in the world of payroll, you typically will secure a salary increase of some nature. It's very rarely the reason someone's looking in the first instance. It's very rare they come to me and I want a new job because I want more money. Now, they may well get that as a result of changing jobs, but it's very rarely the reason they're looking at it. It usually does link more to the pay philosophy piece. There's something in their total comp that isn't quite working, whether that's work-life balance, whether it's the ability to work from home remotely, whether it's the wellness package, whatever. They're usually way more into part of the reason they want to make a shift than it is the financial element specifically, although they'll often secure an increase as a result. And actually using data, so we've tried to do something here, and people, by all means, if you're listening to this, I haven't mentioned on the show before, we've been going for a couple of years. We've got a salary tool on our website, which may be misleading because people might think it's to calculate payroll. It's not. You can go there and work out what you're worth in the world of payroll by clicking those metrics. How big is your payroll? What sector are you working in? How many qualifications have you got? How many years of experience? How big is your team? What's the kind of frequency you're processing? All these different metrics. That, and at the end of that, we use all the data that we receive from every candidate that we register, from every client vacancy we take. It all plugs into an algorithm that pumps out what we think is an accurate benchmark. But I think it goes back to data can be so valuable. If you use it smartly, you can get some amazing outcomes that can help drive really important decisions. If we break that at a bigger scale, this can really drive significant business objectives and business outcomes, business success stories. And we've just got to get underneath the hood, which of course your business and the work that you're doing is really helping organizations to do that. It'd be great to know if there's anything. Come on.
Well, and understanding, I think. Yeah, I mean, and understanding to your point, like what is important to people. So we've seen, once you get to 120% comp ratio or high in your range, whatever you want to call it, at a certain point, money doesn't matter. You can throw them $0. You can throw them 5%. And those are the analytics that you have in payroll and watching people move and when they leave that you can start to analyze. I mean, and that's a great example of what you just said. at some point, high performers aren't just interested in money.
Yeah, I mean, the talk we've got hasn't come out yet. We've got an update coming, which is going to track the inflation and the housing indexes. So you know that you're paid well now, but in 6 months, to your point, it doesn't have to be, I think you mentioned earlier, pay doesn't have to be based on merit twice a year. It should happen when you fall out of sync with what's reasonable, right? And that's when you should have those conversations. What's the question I haven't asked? I mean, this is your expertise, your expert area, working at comp, linking it to pay strategy, pay philosophy, and payroll. I've tried to think of the questions I thought would help our listeners today from a payroll perspective. Obviously, it's an industry that I've been immersed in for 20 years. And there may be something that you've come across with the clients you're working with. You know what, Nick? Here's something that a payroll person came to me with, a problem we solved that perhaps I haven't considered or perhaps may be useful for our listeners. Anything else you'd like to share?
No, I mean, for us, payroll has become, if you think about analytics, and you said, it's a growing space. So if we buy on that, the payroll data piece, that piece of the business has become infinitely more important over the past years. And then being able to tie that data to other places. So, I mean, payroll is integral, not just for getting people paid anymore. I think that was, if you talk about change of perception over time, it was just functionally, how do I get people paid? But now you have the ability to kind of go back in and look at those analytics over time. And that's changed a ton, because you're right at the heart. It's the most fluid, least understood piece of the business is humans. And then the term I use a lot, Nick, is humans are highly statistically predictable and individually amazingly unique. And so the predictability piece, payroll's in a unique place to deal with that, but they also deal with the individual, the human piece, and how do you let managers be humans and manage other humans that are out there as human resources. So they went from probably a peripheral, in my mind, coming from an outside space, a peripheral, they get the job done, know what is there, to basically a truly integral part of the business and driving it forward, especially as we have labor issues.
Yeah, no, you raised many great points and brilliant insights on the show as well. So thank you for sharing them with me. I think, one of the things you say a lot, something I would say a lot is often we're paralyzed by what we've got in front of us. We're trying to achieve change. We're trying to achieve an objective, but we're paralyzed because of the amount of work's ahead of us. And don't get stuck in the how. Look at the who. Who is around you that can support you to get what you need to get to? And whether that's partnering with someone like yourself at Visier, whether it's partnering with ourselves, looking at salary tools, looking at the wealth of resources you've got on your website, ours, and all the networks on LinkedIn. Like, if you want to make a change, you want to raise your profile in payroll, either individually or you want your organization's profile to improve, don't get stuck in the how. Look at the who. Who's around you that can help you in this community? Because there are some great providers out there right now.
Well, and I think the where, Nick, so, there's so much tech out there and you've got so much data that you're sitting on, to quote someone super famous and to show what a great reader I am, Cheshire Cat from Alice in Wonderland, basically says, if you don't know where you're going, all roads will lead you there. And so determine that strategy of what you think the business could be. You're sitting on all this data, and then start to use the analytics to figure out how I'm going to achieve what I want to achieve that's there. So, do we want to reduce turnover? Do we want to take care of pay equity? Like, list out what you want to be if you grow up, and what you want to do. And that's where you become strategic. So you start saying, not just here's my data, but actually here's the business objectives you said you want to do based on the data and the analytics. This is the gap that we have. So now how do we tackle this? That's your thesis. And then you can go back and reanalyze that. But to your point, it's not the data is the piece that you leverage later once you figure out your problem.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, mic drop moment. I think that's a great place to finish the show. It's been a fantastic conversation, Sean. You've given some fantastic insights to our listeners. Thank you ever so much for joining me, of course, on the Payroll Podcast. Thanks for just giving us a bit of an insight into how payroll can interlink with compensation strategy, right? If you're not linking it already and you're listening to this, right, go to the website, links in the show notes, check out Visier Smart Compensation Solutions, and just, immerse yourself in the data you've got on your website, the resources that allow you to really understand why this interlink is so important. If it's not impacting you now, it's going to in the future, because that's the way the industry is headed. So, thanks for sharing your insights and your knowledge. It's been great. And of course, if you're a regular listener to the show, keep sharing this episode with all of your colleagues and friends. Let's make sure that they're aware of how collaboration and how insight learning and all the other things we talked about today can can elevate the world of payroll, right? It's really, really important. And if you get a moment, subscribe to the show, leave us a review. That'd be fantastic. And of course, if you have a payroll-related vacancy, that's what we do. We're a payroll staffing partner. Get in touch with jgarecruitment.com or email me at nick@jgarecruitment.com. We'd love to help you find your next payroll talent, whatever that might be. Payroll sales, payroll implementation, payroll directors, global, whatever it is, we can help. So do keep in touch. And of course, all the links to today's episode that Sean has shared and talked about will also be in the show notes. Sean, any closing thoughts? Anything you'd like to leave our listeners with as we exit today's show? As a triathlete to triathlete.
No, I think that covers it. And I think I'll just reiterate, if you think the two are separate, comp and payroll, and they were separate before, they are merging together, and multiple payroll providers offer solutions around comp now, and it's integrated into the process. And interestingly enough, payroll providers are offering those services in their tool, which I'm not the brightest guy. So for me, that just shows you that they think payroll should be driving that, and it's part of the payroll process, and it's all integrated. Like you said, it's happening.
It's happening. Well, listen, you've been listening to Sean Luitjens at Visier. I've been your host. I'm Nick Day at JGA Recruitment, and we look forward to bringing you the next episode of the Payroll Podcast real soon. Sean, thank you. This episode is sponsored by Deel. That's Deel. Deel is your forever people platform built to simplify your entire global payroll process. Deel's fully managed global payroll makes it possible to pay your entire team in over 100 countries and in over 200 currencies, all in one place. So whether you're an enterprise business, a small company, or something in between, Deel is built to meet your unique business needs. So if you're ready to transform your global payroll system, click the link in the show notes to book a demo with Deel today. That's Deel.